I've been told to grab the mic and say it's 11 o'clock, so if you're staying, then you're in the right room. And if you're going, wise move, okay? Yeah. If you are staying, if you would like to come closer, it is going to be interactively such that you will probably need to be able to see what's written on that pink piece of paper there, and be near enough for me to chuck bits of paper at you at different points. So if you wanted to sort of waft your way forward in a sort of a gentle way, not just move, waft. Yeah, so there's a sort of a certain flow to the movement, okay? And I haven't got a clicker, but I have got slides, apparently, so... Feels like the story of my life. There's enormous potential there, but it's not going to appear, is it? I know I'm going to have to say that. Yes. Shut up. Oh, there we go. I'm going to just say, as you're sitting down, you might have found a little piece of paper on your chair, like that. Anybody got any ideas what is going on there? Anybody done it? Anybody really, because this is probably the point at which I ought to tell you, I am here recruiting for MI5. It's nothing to do with the Bible, and you have been specially selected. If you crack that, then, then you're going to have an interesting afternoon. Any ideas? Anybody figuring? Well, while you're looking at it, let me send bits of paper in different directions. Those of you who've ever been with me before doing this sort of thing will know that I send bits of paper all over the place. And also that I do tend to wander a bit. So I'm going to say now, because apparently it's being filmed for the website later, apologies to anybody watching this. You won't see me now for the rest of the morning, okay? So I'll now go over here and say, could you take one and pass on in that direction? And then from this side, could you take one and pass on in that direction? And I will move slightly because I have been told. That's a sign of something else I always need to say, things like these. I'm one of those nervous people. I get nervous when I'm doing stuff like this. One of the signs of that is this. I won't be able to do what people do when they stride up and down talking. I'll have to come over here and keep looking back here. And it's only in my 50s that I've become able to admit to the fact that if I don't look at that, I get even more nervous and lose my way. So I'm Hugh Thomas. I work for the Diocese. I look after church schools for the Diocese. So I'm involved in education. Also, particularly relevant to today for me, I am accidentally now a youth worker again, which I hadn't planned to be at this stage in life, but in a thing called the Pittsmore Youth Club, which, is thriving, but... not in various ways, in interesting ways. I also write for people like the Church Times, and I've recently done, first time I've done a book, I have got a copy here. I've recently done a book, which I'll be mentioning because the stuff that we're talking about this morning is very much from there, about Bible stories and about how we read Bible stories. And that is really my passion and enthusiasm, coming from an education background where I used to write on how we do stories in general. Sorry, yes. Actually, I tell you what, if somebody could do this for me, if you could take those, and if anybody comes in late, can you just throw one at them, okay? I shouldn't say throw, should I? I realise I'm saying throw all the time. It's making it sound like So the purpose of this session is to look at creative ways of exploring Bible stories. This is the point at which somebody jumps up and says, I'm supposed to be in raffia work, and runs out of the door. But otherwise, I then just talk through some of the things that I think are sort of underpinning what we're doing, if that's right. I think what we're doing this morning, and what we do when we sometimes train in education and in how we do things to do with the Bible, is a little bit like the mask on the plane. You remember the instruction when the masks come down? It never happened to me, but when the masks come down on the plane, you're told to get your own right, then get your kids right. I've had great fun with my kids over the years, saying to them, you know what that means, don't you? That means, yeah, okay, but yeah. And I think there's an importance of that when it comes to how we're dealing with the Bible, with our children and our young people in our churches. I was really inspired by what Hannah said, actually, about young people and their wish to engage and converse rather than be told, rather than just be told the stuff. And so that's what I'm very much about. I think we need to breathe again with the Bible. I think we stopped breathing with it and we've allowed it to become a bit suffocating. And I think that's affected the way we do all sorts of teachings, but for this morning, story, particularly story. Can I just check everybody's now got 3 bits of paper? You should have a piece of paper folded into 3. If it's a bit cockeyed, I was doing them last night and I'd had a glass of wine. So you've got the one further down the bottle, possibly. You should also have one that's got my notes on it, called In the Way of the Story. Oh, yeah. You can sit down. I didn't mean to sort of stand around, sort of, but yeah. By all means, yeah. Yeah. Has everybody got one? Yeah. Okay. If not, people can always share. Okay. But you should also have one of these. Got one of those? Any idea what's going on there? Yeah. This is in code. Can you decode it? Round of applause for MI5 agent in the corner there. And the code, any idea of this? How would you do? Yes. A is Z. B is Y. Absolutely. Yes. Fantastic. Yeah. The thing is, with that piece of paper, now that you've done that, you can scrap that, can't you? That's done. You've decoded it. My concern is that's the way we treat the Bible sometimes, and particularly how we treat stories. We get something out of them, and it's akin to scrunching up the story and disposing of it. We've done that. You know, Good Samaritan, got the message out of that one. We've told our kids to be nice to each other, and that's it. Move on. You know, if you look and open out the 3-fold piece of paper, you'll see masterpieces, you know? Masterpieces that shouldn't be scrunched up. We wouldn't go to the Mona Lisa, have a look and think, oh, it's all about people looking inscrutable and stuff like that, isn't it? Right, we can get rid of that now. We don't need it anymore. And that's very much what... Oh, can I have the next slide, please? Yeah, that's very much what we're going to be looking at over the course of the morning, how we do that. I'll forget to say that if I'm not careful. So there is this need to actually spend time with Bible stories and revisit them. And I'll tell you one other little story, and then I'll rattle through the bullet points behind me. There was a Bible teacher called Edward Greenstein, and he taught Hebrew and Old Testament at a college in the States. And his students were always having a go at him. And they were saying, we just want the plain meaning of the Bible. We don't want you, going into all this sort of, exploring and interpreting. We just let the Bible speak for itself. And it grew and it grew. But we just let the Bible speak. So one week, Edward Greenstein came into college, came into the classroom. He said, I'm going to do what you've been asking for all these weeks. Got the Bible, put it on the table where they could all see it. And he just went. And I'm told he sat for about 10 minutes. Well, the silence spread over the room. And his message, I suppose, was, got across that we need to do things with the Bible. So in a way, there's a tension between those two things. We're always doing things with the Bible. We're always interpreting. We're always finding new ways of doing it. But we've just got to be careful that the ways we do that don't in some way cause us to take it, read the story, scrunch it up, job done. Yeah? So that's, I suppose, what this is all about this morning. And I'm suggesting there are 4 things that we do to make sure that we avoid that particular problem. They should be on your little handouty thing there. They're certainly on the thing behind me. We need to read them. We need to stop and read them, to actually read them. rather than assume we know what's in the stories. There are people preaching tomorrow morning on Luke 4 who assume they know what's in there. Some of them started writing the sermon before they read the text. I guarantee it, okay? They won't own up to it tomorrow morning if you ask them. But ask them anyway. It could be fun. We need to see them as stories as well. We need to stop treating them like antiques. I get this with teachers in schools all the time. I work with church schools where we do a lot of work with Bible stories. And I'm always saying to them, you can't break a story. You can't break it. I think people think that somehow if they somehow put a wrong spin on it, or say the wrong thing about it, or disagree with a prophet, or say they thought Moses got that wrong, or they thought Joshua was a bit savage there, that I think they think that I'm going to burst in through the door in full Spanish Inquisition garb, and you know, they're in trouble. I only keep that for weekends. I don't wear it during the week. And the way to do that is to apply our innate working experience of story to story. So one of the things that led me to write a book on the whole thing was my experience as a primary teacher of decades of experience in primary education. And just finding how many times have I read Where the Wild Things Are? And even as I'm saying it to you now, I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to get it out when I get home, because I think it's a while since I last read it. Each Peach, Pear, Plum. How many times have I read those stories? Actually, I'm going to go back to The Wild Things, because that was one where, practically on a weekly basis as a teacher, where we have enough depth and grasp of the story to mean that we go back to it. We would never scrunch up The Wild Things and say, well, if we've read that, we can get rid of it now. My copy's still on my shelf. And then it's about responding to them. There is something about responding and taking something from the story. The problem is, in our churches, we tend to allow that last step to trump all the others. The zest to get a lesson for these kids, the zest to draw out the meaning for these kids, causes us to get that and tell the story, racing for that message, that this is what the story tells us. I think I said it when I did a thing here 2 years ago. I don't know if anybody took me up on it, but if anybody in church ever says the words, so what this story means, you have my permission to stand up and say rubbish. Okay? I don't know if anybody tried it out. I've not heard any feedback, but I'll say it again today, because it doesn't mean one thing ever. So could we have the next slide, please? Just a little bit as well, which might actually ring bells with anybody from a primary education-y, background-y type-y place of some decades as well. Or can I say, of decades enough where you'd recognize the bottom right-hand corner. Some years back in the 80s, we moved from saying in our schools that it was all about reading to, and it was about reading with. That there was this real sense of reading with. So let me give you, because time is all over the shop today, so I'm not sure how, have I got till 12? Have I got till 12? Yeah, well, before 12. I'm supposed to let you go a bit early so you can be marketed. So I'll get through those 4, but we'll do as many bits and bobs as we can, and some of it's in the book, but some of it's on your hand out there as well, and I'll race through so you've got some of the stuff. But if I had to give you one overarching, this is what it's about, it's this. It's about getting rid of the situation where I've got the story, I know the story, and I'm a brilliant interpreter, and also I'm older than you, because I do youth work, or because I'm the Sunday school or the children's club teacher. I know it, you're there, and I'm going to tell you what it's about. If at that point you turn around and say, I don't like what Jesus did there, I'm going to explain to you why, I've read a Bible commentary, or I've read Scripture Union notes, and actually, although it seems bad, Jesus was really being lovely to that woman, and what he said, he didn't really mean it, and, he had a little smile. It's about doing it differently to that model. It's about me coming there, and us looking at the story. Don't know why that picture just caught my mind when I was thinking about this. It could be because this week we in primary education will all be remembering the wonderful, now late Shirley Hughes, one of the greatest storytellers of our age, whose stories you can go back to. You'd never scrunch one of them up, would you? You wouldn't scrunch up Alfie Gets In First, that classic. But to me, it's an image of what happens when we approach the wonder, the fascination of a biblical story with children and young people. We need to learn to stand with them. We used to refer to a thing called the apprenticeship model in teaching reading. That was before it all turned to phonics. But we used to refer to this whole idea that, it's about being apprentices alongside one another. So to do that, what we're going to do over the course of the next now 40 minutes or so is a few little bits of literary theory. I'm going to do what the book does, actually, which is just do a few little snippety-poppety bits of literary theory, okay? How they relate to stories and your knowledge of stories, and then how they can result in some bits and bobs of things that get people jumping up and running around and doing things. And the first one I want to do, just checking, have you got the Cana story on your handout there? Because if you have, I can save time. It should be on the handout, rather than on the three-foldy one. The Cana story, I think it's on, yeah, right. I was going to get you doing something in a group, but I'm going to cut bits and bobs as we go along now because of time, if that's all right. Stopping and reading. One of the really important things we do when we do that business of stopping and reading is actually taking time over each step of the story. And to do that, I realise, hang on a minute, I've put my pen down somewhere, yeah, I've got it. Okay, to do that, it's about taking a story like that and either doing it where we say, I'm going to tell you the story, I'm going to read the story. Can I just say, by the way, that certain bugbears will come out. When I say read the story, I mean out of a Good News Bible for anybody of about 5 upwards, if not younger than that. You can argue with me later about this, but I despise children's Bibles. I hate them with a vengeance. I think they pap up the story often. Okay, children as young, in our foundation stages, we use Good News Bibles. Jesus told stories well. Okay, and the Bible tells stories well. So anyway, back to, you read the text and you say, right, I want you to put a hand up like that to stop me when something's happened in the text. The moment something happens in the text, on the third day, some child will put their hand up. Yes, okay. Somebody will put their hand up straight away. And they'll be asking, third day after what? Now, we might have read straight over that, but now we're asking an interesting question. So I'm going to put a line by there. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana. Okay, and we're going to stop by there was a wedding. Okay, and then we're going to now another jump for in Cana. Okay, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee. Actually, if we've got a lovely map out, why not allow both? Okay, do you get the idea, though? You stop for every... Now, the reason why it's important is this. Tomorrow morning, my guess is you're all in churches with fantastic preachers who do a fantastic job. But I say this as somebody who has prepared for tomorrow morning. The temptation story suddenly struck me. We always do them as a job lot. And we don't stop and actually think of each one individually. To be honest, I think we think about the bready one a lot. That one gets a lot of press. That's probably top temptation, isn't it? Everybody knows that one. Shown the kingdoms of the world, second. And I think that the third one, the one that we forget, is pinnacle of the temple. Throw yourself off. Imagine that with a class of 7-year-olds. You are telling them that Satan is offering Jesus the opportunity to do it the way they do it, and if I'm being honest, the way I'd do it. Jump off, angels catch you, everybody goes, what? I'd do it on Saturday night with Anton Deck presenting the damn thing. It's just so tempting, isn't it? So stopping and finding within this bigger story one event that, if I'm being honest, that last one, I have spent the week slightly challenging myself about the fact that I'm still not out of the zone. Well, I switched it to Graham Norton last night. I thought, no, Graham would do a better job of it, so it would be Graham Norton presenting you. Try it with your Cana story. Just very quickly, if only because it gives me a chance to go and have a sip of my tea. Okay? Just put a line where something happens. You're basically saying, stop, something happened there. okay, that's it. Now, in a proper workshop, and if we were doing this over the course of a day, sometimes I do days on this sort of thing, and if we were doing it over the day, I would now give you ages to do that, but we don't need to, okay? You got the idea. But the idea is stopping, because something has happened, and then something else happens, and that's where the story kicks in. When they get this one, then it's the start of them really getting stuck into stories. If you are a teacher of children, it is the point at which they realize that in their writing, I went to the shop and I bought a packet of crisps. We need something to happen, you know? The shop blew up. Yes, great. We're there. I saved everybody using a packet of crisps. Work on that. Good idea. Work on it. Can't think how you would. But can we have the next slide, please? The great writer E.M. Forster, if you've ever loved A Room with a View, or Howard's End, or some of his writing, he talked about plot being like this. He said, look, a narrative of events has the emphasis on causality. And then he made this distinction. He said, the king died, and then the queen died. That's a story. It's all right, but that's a story. The king died, and the queen died of grief. That's a plot. It's when you're able to see why that hand there has to have that hand there and the event in the middle. It's when you're able to do that that you're making those connections. Right. I'll say a bit about this as I'm rattling around, if I may. So it's that causality thing. And it is one of those stages that children go through. And anything they go through in understanding story in general is pretty good stuff when it comes to them grasping a bit of Bible story. I'm dropping them all over the place here. Now, I'm doing what really you're not supposed to do and landing on people. Time is against us, so... folks who've got bits of card, could you just come out the front here, please, with your bits of card and hold them out? You don't need to do anything from here on in, other than what everybody else tells you to do. Some of you might have seen me do this before, but I think it's one of those activities I do again and again with children. Sometimes I have them reading verses. Sometimes I have them remembering bits of stories. But who needs to move where? And because you don't know their names, you are just going to have to shout at people and say, oi, you need to go there, okay? Who needs to move to get that story back to the order it's meant to go in? Okay, I'm going to speed you up here nice and quick. Really, yeah, order, be bossy. Come on, you children's workers, youth workers, you should be bossy at this. Yes. Are we in order? You lot might like to do hand-to-hand and have a look to see who's either side of you and just see whether they look like they're right for you. It's about getting children, young people, to actually play with the sequence rather than just race through and leave the story behind. Every time we do something like this, we cause them to actually ask, why does that event there need this to have happened before? Does it need that to have happened before? Actually, is this a new, and what I love about moments like this, I don't know the answer to this. If these two were removed from the story so that Jesus and his disciples got invited, his mother told the servants, could we drop that out? Okay, right. Okay, straight away, we're doing what we do with stories. I'll come back to, I'm going to ask you about in a bit, because we're going to come back to it when I ask you a question about it. You can leave the cards on the floor. Do you want to give them a clap? Because I think being called out of friends is always a... Oh, we could have put that one in as well. But that's a problem. That's a problem. And some people think that if we don't know what happened in a story, that somehow means we are taking a bit of a risk telling it. That's rubbish. Stories are there to be told by people who don't totally know everything about them. Otherwise, we just have laws and commandments. So I actually don't know when the water actually became wine. Nor do you. That's the great thing about the story. I actually also don't know when they ran out of wine. So we could have thrown those in as well. Stories are creative. You can be creative with them. You can always throw extra bits into a story and play around with a story. And as part of that, we come to, I've got to watch time here because I'm really running for time, that it's about seeing them as stories. So we're on to the second one of my 4 here, but the others are quicker than the first one, and genuinely enjoying them. Just turn to the person next to you for a moment, if you would, and do this for me. Scribble or verbally make a list of every character or character grouping, because you can have a thing called collective characters. You know, when the guards come to arrest Jesus, you know, if we're listing the characters in that story, we don't need to list absolutely every guard, okay? Yeah, so collective. List the characters or collective characters in that story we've just looked at there, the wedding at Cana, but don't leave any out. And imagine you were telling this to children and asking them to do it. And have a look and see whether there's anybody who might get left out, such that we'd have to read again. Very quickly, though, because we haven't got a lot. Yeah, very quick. As I say, I would normally give longer to do this. I said it'd be very quick. Sorry, with only an hour, I've got to say to you, who's third on your list? Can I hear some people who are third on the list? Disciples, okay. Have you got a different third on the list? Jesus, right? Always a good answer in anything that takes place in a church. Always a good answer. Answer of choice, yes. Okay. The bride and groom, okay. Just look at your third person. Have you not got there? Did somebody say no? All right, yeah, try and remember who your third person was. If you could ask them one question, what would you ask them right now, if somehow you could? Now, if I was Scylla, this is the point at which I'd say, surprise, surprise, and, inward, but yeah, I'm... Last question of this sort on this story. Can you just take a look at the exchange between Jesus and his mum? See them as stories. They are not. I have a slide that I use sometimes when I'm doing stuff about Bible stories, which it shows a massive mushroom cloud of a bomb. Today felt like not the day to show it, okay? But but the point I'm sometimes trying to make is, people sometimes fear when they're working with the Bible with children that it could go off, that something nuclear could happen. You cannot break a story. You can't go wrong when you're working with a story. You can ask any question about a story. In fact, if you push the boundaries on asking, you will enrich your experience of stories. So look again at the Cana story. And just, again, to the person next to you, could you just consider this question? Isn't he rude? Off you go, have a chat about it. I am sorry, we could take longer with any of these things I'm asking out there, but just throw back. What do you think? Rude? Yeah? Yeah. So, he's a 30-year-old man, okay? Yeah, he's not a 10-year-old. Okay, yes, yeah, okay, yeah, yeah. Woman? Yeah, 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 absolutely. If I did that to my mum. Sorry, for the camera, to my mum. Whoa. Yeah. Right, okay. That. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, that would have enriched the story somewhat, though, wouldn't it? Sort of. Yeah, I'd love it in the King James. Yeah. She absolutely does. Woman wanted to, and she just turns away, turns to the servant, do whatever my son tells you to do, Basically, she is like my mum. Okay, she really is like my mum. Yeah. Sometimes, when there are bits of the Bible where we may want to debate and discuss what Jesus does and did, but to me then I start asking myself, is it dishonoring? Does it knock against a commandment? My daughter sometimes will talk to me, not the woman bit, but that sort of response. My daughter, I keep on nodding at the camera for my kids because I'm going to show them this afterwards. My daughter will sometimes and I can understand why when I reflect on it. It's because, not because she's 20-something, because I'm 50-something, okay, and will sometimes respond quite assertively, but I never feel dishonored about it. I just feel straight talked to. But what we're doing, we're digging into the story. John Yorke, who was one of the great EastEnders producers, he once said about characters that the really important thing in a character is the gap between how they wish to be seen and how they actually are. And I find that a beautiful idea to take with me into Bible stories when I read them. How they want to be seen and how they actually are. You take that quote into the stories of David. You take it into the story of Ruth, including all the characters in the story of Ruth. You take it to Peter, you take it to, and also take it elsewhere as well. Part of doing this work means that you've got to look at other stories to come back to Bible stories. So if any of you are hooked on Inventing Anna on Netflix, take that idea over there. If you're not, it's worth getting hooked on. The gap between how a character wishes to be seen and who they actually are. Watch The Lion King and see how that plays out in the life of Simba. Or Mean Girls. It's incredible, that one in Mean Girls. I mean, the great thing about this as well is you can all go home and later today, you can binge watch for the rest of the weekend, and, you can say, yeah, this is my research, I'm following up, So, yeah. Can we have the next slide, please? It's about seeing them as stories. Oh, sorry, yes, I meant to put that one up when I said, isn't he rude? So could we have the next slide after that one, please? Yeah, it's about seeing them as stories. Just take 10 seconds, because I can swig my tea, to have a read of those two quotes. Both of them beautifully Sheffield-based quotes. Some of you are probably thinking, what a creep sticking his boss up there in a quote, okay, on a slide. But both of them beautifully Sheffield-based quotes. David Clowns used to teach this sort of thing, actually. In fact, was one of the people who made the breakthrough into saying we need to relax with the Bible and read it as literature and enjoy it as stories if we're going to get something scriptural out of it. And Bishop Pete, of course the Bible, actually I'm going to do my Bishop Pete impression if I'm not careful. I'll just read the quote. Of course the Bible is always more than carefully crafted literature, but it is seldom less than that. Which I really like that one. Because what we're not saying here is that by reading it this way we disrespect the story. By golly, no, definitely not. If anything, it's given it the respect it deserves. Thirdly, there is an element to all this of taking to any story the stuff that you know about stories, the innate knowledge you have. I taught in some quite rum places. It was the nature of my teaching career. I loved everywhere I taught, all within walking distance of this city centre down the road here. But I quickly learned as a teacher, because I was always primary teacher and more infant than junior as a teacher. If I said the words, there once was a woman who, I learned that I had something that I could use to stop a room, even when they were distracted or upset or something like that. And we're like it as adults as well. The moment somebody says, I don't know, a priest, an imam, and a rabbit walk into a bar, we're all thinking, there's a punchline there somewhere. There is, I'll tell you it later. But just for a moment, just to get this idea of how we all know our way around stories. And it's wired into us because of our long-term memories. Could you do me a favor again? Just turn to the person next to you. And without plot spoiling, tell them the story or film or play where you most remember that of a twist, that gasp of you suddenly realize what's going on there, or everything changes, the big twist. Very quickly, you've only got 15 seconds for this. Now, can I say, if you have done that great thing of saying, oh yeah, so-and-so said the name of the film and said, yeah, it's great, you know, there's that big twist in the middle where you discover it was the detective that did it, then you will, yeah, I was going to say you will burn in hell. I can't say that in this room, can I? But yeah, you've just plot spoiled, okay? So you have to try and wipe that bit from what just happened. But without saying what happened, just shout some names of those narratives where the twist has been so, it takes your breath away. Have we got any? The Sixth Sense always crops up when you do this with a group of people. Sixth Sense. Murder on the Orient Express. I had a problem when I was doing the bookie thing, that I made reference to a couple of examples of twists that were like this. And it's the one point where the footnote says, I would love to footnote these works, but I can't. Because, of course, if you say what happens and, you know, you spoil it, yeah. Any others? The Duke. Right. So there we are. You don't go home and binge watch. You can all get to the cinemas and find out. I don't know. I don't want. And there's this thing, isn't there, of you won't tell me. I don't want to know because yes. Okay. Fantastic. There is a reason why the mousetrap has run and run and run. It's about those moments. So it's about knowing stories and knowing that there are things that happen. And if I can have the next slide, please. I'm suggesting that there are, next one, after that, I'll have to skip over that now. There are various things that are just common to stories that we get used to and we get to know. And if I can jump to one, I'm going to just go straight to characters and characterization. And I'm just going to ask you very quickly, I'm going to rattle through some of this stuff now, to list 3 characters. One from the story that we've been looking at, the Cana story. One from a different Bible story. You can use that trifold piece of paper if you want to. And one not from the Bible, just from a story that you love. Scribble down their names or just make a mental note of them, but just come up with 3 characters if you would. And I'm going to talk as you do it. Because just pick 3. You just pick, you just make a little list of 3, your own little list. And I'm going to ask you a question about any one of those characters, because if we had time, we would do this. But again, I think it's one of those simplest questions that I've just used for decades. What do you know about them, and how do you know what you know about them? What do you know about them, and how do you know what you know about them? And I would suggest that, there are various ways that we do get to know about characters. 2 of the most prominent ones being what they do and what they say. Particularly, actually, what they say builds and builds a character. When they're stood there talking, they build themselves up. If we looked on that folded piece of paper, you could find loads of examples. There is an activity that we will not do now, but that I will just show you. Could we have the next slide? Just take a look at this, if you would. This is the start of a story, a well-known story. Now, if it wasn't 11:50, I would ask you now to choose one of these 4 points. Over here, we've got a mum who's in that scene there. Over there, we've got a child in that scene. Over here, we got Jesus. Over here, we got Thaddeus. I could have done the disciples. But this is one of the few chances Thaddeus gets to get a mention. Because otherwise, Thaddeus doesn't get many mentions. So I decided to pick one of them. And Thaddeus is among the disciples doing what's happening up there on that slide. I'd ask you to go to one of them. We haven't got time, so can you just, for a moment, mentally point to the one that you'd run for? Or physically point if you want to, you know. But then once you've gone there, I'd ask you to stay there and take a look at the other three characters. So if I'm stood here, I'm now a child. What do I think of him? Actually, do I know much about him? Is it my parents who are really, doing this? And that leads me to think about her over there, about my mum. What about her? What do I think? She seems to trust him, so I'm going to trust him. I mean, this is the sort of conversation we'd have in our little group by here. But then this fella's saying, I can't. Actually, I tell you something. I am 7 years old. I've worked long enough with 7-year-olds to tell you this fact. At 7, I may not know much about him. I may not even want to go over to see him. But because of what he did, I now want to go over to see him. Okay? It's the way. And at this point, because stories invite play, you can throw other people in. By the way, I keep saying when we're working with children, when we're working with young people, I've done this in congregations. And I've done it in congregations with children and adults there. And the wonderful thing about it is it's one of those great moments when you can say to the children beforehand, you're going to be better at this than the rest of them. And they always are. They always get the idea. They've usually finished by the time some adults are still doing their classic, I'm an Anglican. I don't leave my seat for absolutely anything, So, try it with the congregation. Oh, we can put other characters in as well, because stories invite creativity, playfulness. So we could put in Mary Magdalene. We could put in the prophet Elisha. I stuck him in because of the story about Elisha and those kids. He's clearly got a bit of a downer. We could put in a child who doesn't actually like Jesus, who actually is looking and thinking, don't know what it is about, I just don't like him. Because they would have existed, okay? And so we could put those characters in as well to play the game even further. Could we have the next slide? Sorry, rattling through here. If a story had a shape, what would it be? Now, Jani Hauka, fantastic children's novelist, she once suggested that there are 3 basic shapes at play in all stories and all storytelling. There's the relationship where Romeo meets Juliet and it all kicks off and we get West Side Story. Isn't that a fantastic new film? Okay. And then there's also the arrow going into the circle, which can be a shark going to Amity Town or can be E.T. landing in somebody's back garden. And there is the quest. There can be a Lord of the Rings. There is that story. It can also be we're going on a bear hunt. Could also be Where the Wild Things Are. I have debated long and hard whether Where the Wild Things Are is all 3 of those, actually, for various reasons. You can draw your own as well. But any story we encounter, it's about that innate knowledge that we have of stories. And just to say as well, John York, I keep coming back to my lovely EastEnders producer, he also points out that he says, look, in every story, there's just one story going on. There's always a journey there and a journey back again. And whenever that journey there, journey back again happens, the goal is to get back here. But the climax, the important bit of the story, is somewhere around about the middle, where the character acquires what they need to be the person they needed to be within this story. Forget this for a moment. The story happens here. It's the point at which Elliot realizes that he's going to have to step out and do something to help somebody. It's the point at which a police chief realizes that regardless of his fear of water, he is going to go and kill a shark. It's the point at which Rose says, you jump, I jump. Oh, you could watch that this evening, couldn't you? I know I could. Right, responding. A few things about responding. We'll have to click 2 slides on at this point. There we go. This is a scene from the storyboarding that they did for Jurassic Park. Some of you might recognize it. It's the point where we have not seen a Tyrannosaurus Rex, but we are seeing the water on the in the cup, in the car, the way it's shaking, the way it's vibrating. Something is happening. Suspense, surprise. When did we stop allowing our breath to be taken away by a Bible story? Possibly when we thought we knew it so well that we could just scrunch it up. If I watch Jurassic Park this evening, I will still thrill at that moment. If I watch Jaws, then when the fellow goes rooting around under the water, I'm not going to give away, I'm not going to plot spoil, okay? Sometimes we need to get that back as tellers and teachers before we share that experience of the story with children, and to find the moment in the story that is breathtaking. If I was to ask you, what's the most important thing that happened in that story we've been looking at, what would you choose? And then it's about relating it to ourselves. And can I just say, when we're relating to a Bible story, I always suggest look at the verbs rather than the nouns. Rites of purification, I don't do those. Okay, I have a bath every so often, but I don't do rites. But I do take things from one place to another place. And that's a verb in a story I could hold to and think, when have I had to take something important? When have I been in a position like a wine steward who's just been asked to do the most crazy, stupid thing, a servant, asked to, and is taking something to the chief steward? When have I had to take something to my boss and I felt nervous about it? As a child, when have I taken something to somebody and I've had to feel the weight that is on those people? And it's about making connections and receiving what the story does have to offer us. There is something about, I'm not saying we shouldn't take from stories, I'm saying we should take many, many things from stories. There's a little activity that we won't now fit in because I just want to give you one example to finish up. This is all, can we go to the last slide which says getting in the way of the story. So next 3 slides on, please. 1, 2, 3. There we go. It is for me all about getting into the way of the story. It's about finding your way in there. There's a lovely story about Cardinal Dolan in New York who was doing some Ignatian spirituality work. And as happens in those lovely exercises, he was asked to imagine his way into the nativity story. And so Tim Dolan, being somebody who would just so imagine him lending himself to this, he did just that. And he imagined his way into this story, and he was encouraged to imagine his way into the stable. And there was a point at which he's realizing probably should have worn different shoes for this exercise. That's how in there he is. And he went in there and he could see the light in the corner, so he made his way to the corner. When he got to the corner, there was the Holy Family. There was Joseph, there was Mary. She was shattered. She was absolutely shattered, but she was also radiant with just mum's joy. No auras, just mum's joy. And Tim Dolan took the scene in. He was there. He had the smells. He had the sounds. Then something amazing happened. She handed him the baby. She reached out, and so he took the baby. He held Jesus and bopped Jesus a bit like that because he was holding the baby. Friends, that's what I see as getting into the way of the story. That's what I'm encouraging you to do. I do have copies of the book with me if anybody's interested, but I'm terrible at saying things like that, so I'm going to say that really quickly and say, go now to your next session because we are on 11:59 and it's time to go. Okay, thank you for your time this morning.